I feel like I've lived so many lives already, looking back at all of that stuff. And, oh, yeah, I mean, I could write volumes on probably every...
For decades, Shania Twain has been known as the Queen of Country Pop, a woman whose voice and charisma conquered stages worldwide. Her carefully built image was polished, elegant, and untouchable. Yet behind the lights, the hits, and the sold-out tours, there were stories she never told, secrets buried beneath her smile. Now, at 60, she's no longer hiding. In a startling revelation, she admits there were 5 men she could not stand, 5 figures who shaped her life, not with kindness, but with betrayal, disrespect, cruelty, and manipulation. These aren't rumors or whispers from the tabloids. These are her words, her truth, spoken after years of silence. For the first time, Shania Twain pulls back the curtain and reveals the names and the reasons. And what she says will change how the world views her rise to fame, her struggles, and her survival in an industry that was never built to let her win. When Shania Twain first stepped into the music industry, it was not the glamorous story fans like to imagine. Born Eileen Regina Edwards in Windsor, Ontario, she grew up far from the spotlight, in a world of financial struggle and hardship. Her father figure, Jerry Twain, and her mother Sharon raised her in Timmins, where poverty was constant and music became her only escape. She was no stranger to responsibility. By her teenage years, she was already singing in local bars to help support her family, a child carrying the weight of adulthood. But the world of country music in the late 1980s and early 1990s was dominated by men, executives in suits, radio programmers, producers, and singers who didn't believe a young Canadian woman could shake up Nashville. Shania faced rejection after rejection, with industry insiders telling her that she wasn't marketable, that her voice didn't fit the mold, or that her looks were distracting rather than powerful. These moments planted seeds of resentment, seeds that would later grow into the list of 5 men she admits she truly hated. Still, she pushed forward. She trained her voice relentlessly, mixing the influences of Dolly Parton, Stevie Wonder, and rock icons into a sound that was uniquely hers. When she finally caught the attention of Mercury Nashville Records in 1993, she thought her struggles were over. But signing the deal was only the beginning of another battle. Instead of supporting her creative vision, executives wanted to control her image, telling her how to dress, what to sing, and how to act in interviews. They wanted her to be a product, a marketable face who would follow their rules. To them, she was a commodity, not an artist. Shania was told to smile, to keep her opinions to herself, and to trust the men who knew better. But deep down, she seethed. She didn't come this far to be silenced. Her breakout came with her second album, The Woman in Me, 1995, co-produced with Robert John Mutt Lang, a man who at first seemed like her greatest ally, but would later become one of her most bitter betrayals. With songs like Any Man of Mine and Whose Bed Have Your Boots Been Under, Shania broke barriers. Suddenly, she was not just a singer but a global force. Yet even then, she was surrounded by whispers that her success was only because of Lang, that she couldn't stand on her own. Male critics dismissed her as a pretty face, with a powerful producer behind her. Radio programmers refused to give her airtime, arguing she was too pop for country stations. Awards shows overlooked her, even as her albums sold millions. It was during these years that Shania began building up a mental list, the names and faces of the men who underestimated her, belittled her, or tried to control her. They thought they were gatekeepers holding the keys to her career, but every insult, every dismissal, only made her more determined. She learned to play their game, smiling in public while burning with defiance in private. The industry wanted her to stay in line, but Shania had other plans. She would not just join country music, she would transform it. And with every rejection, she felt her hatred harden for the men who tried to stand in her way. Men who would later find themselves on the list she finally revealed at 60. Of all the men Shania Twain revealed she hated, one name towers above the rest because His betrayal was not just professional, it was personal, devastating, and unforgettable. Robert John "Mutt" Lang was more than her husband. He was her producer, her creative partner, and the man who helped craft the sound that made her a global superstar. Together, they wrote and produced the groundbreaking album Come On Over, which went on to sell over 40 million copies worldwide, making it the best-selling country album of all time, and one of the best-selling albums in music history. To fans, they were the ultimate power couple, unstoppable, untouchable, and inseparable. But behind closed doors, their marriage was far from perfect, and what Shania would eventually discover would break her to her core. When rumors first began to circulate about Lange's closeness with Marie-Anne Taiebo, a woman Shania had considered a best friend and confidant, she refused to believe them. Marie-Anne had been welcomed into Shania's inner circle, trusted with secrets, given access to her home, and treated like family. The betrayal, when it came, cut twice as deep because it was not only her husband's infidelity, but also her closest friend's treachery. Shania would later reveal that she felt humiliated, discarded, and betrayed in a way that words could never truly capture. This was not just about a marriage ending, it was about trust shattered at its deepest level. The man who had built her career alongside her, who shared her successes and her private life, had betrayed her with the very person she leaned on during her struggles. The pain was so severe that Shania admitted she thought she would never recover, that her voice, her spirit, and her will to keep going might have been permanently broken. The world saw her as a confident, glamorous star, but privately, she was drowning in anger and resentment. For years, she carried that hatred in silence, refusing to let it consume her in public, but unable to deny its presence in her heart. She hated Mutt for betraying her vows. She hated Marie-Anne for stabbing her in the back. And she hated the way the entire situation reduced her to headlines that stripped her humanity away. But from that hate grew a resilience that shaped her next chapter. Shania later married Frederick Taiebo, the ex-husband of Marie-Anne, a twist of fate that turned one of the darkest chapters of her life into a strange kind of poetic justice. Yet even as she found new love, the bitterness toward Lang never truly faded. He was the man who built her empire, but also the man who nearly destroyed her spirit. And when she listed the 5 men she hated most, his name needed no explanation. Fans already knew the story, but hearing her finally admit the depth of her hatred at 60 was a chilling reminder that even legends bleed, even stars are betrayed, and even the strongest women can carry scars that time alone cannot heal. Before the world crowned Shania Twain as the queen of country pop, there was a man who nearly stopped her story before it ever began. A powerful industry figure whose words left wounds that shaped her drive and her resentment for decades. He was a record executive, a gatekeeper in Nashville who believed he held the power to decide who belonged and who didn't. And when Shania stood before him in her early days, with nothing but raw talent and hunger, he dismissed her with a smirk. He told her she would never make it, that her voice was not distinct enough, that she didn't have the right image for country music, and that she should consider giving up before she wasted her time. To a young artist desperate for a chance, those words cut deeper than a knife. But Shania remembered every syllable. At the time, she forced herself to smile and nod, walking out of the meeting as though it hadn't affected her. But deep down, the hatred she felt burned hotter than anything she had ever known. She hated the arrogance, the way this man assumed he had the authority to define her worth, the way he dismissed her, not because of her lack of talent, but because she didn't fit his narrow mold of what a star should look and sound like. That moment stayed with her through every sleepless night, every grueling recording session, every step she took toward building the career he said she couldn't have. It wasn't just one insult, it was the embodiment of an entire industry's bias against women who dared to be more than what they were allowed to be. Nashville at the time was still a boys' club, where men in power dictated the careers of female artists, often forcing them into molds that stripped away authenticity. Shania despised that system, and this executive became the symbol of all the roadblocks thrown her way. Years later, when her albums shattered records and her tours sold out stadiums around the globe, she admitted that part of her triumph was fueled by the memory of that moment, the desire to prove him wrong, to make him regret ever underestimating her. But even in victory, the bitterness lingered. She did not forgive him, nor did she forget. In her list of 5 men she hated most, his name stood tall as a reminder that hatred sometimes comes not from intimate betrayal, but from the cruel indifference of those who hold power. Shania knew she was not the only woman in music who faced such dismissals, but she was one of the few who broke through. And in doing so, she carried with her the scars of those encounters. At 60, when she finally admitted to hating him, it was not said out of pettiness, but as an acknowledgement of the reality she endured. The gatekeeper thought he had the power to silence her, but his rejection became the very fire that drove her to become a legend. For Shania Twain, hatred wasn't weakness. It was a fuel that turned obstacles into stepping stones, and the men who underestimated her only helped carve the path to her throne. Among the 5 men Shania Twain revealed she hated, one stood apart because he was not a husband or an executive, but a fellow performer, a rival who shared the stage with her, yet never offered her the respect she deserved. In an industry where collaboration often hides competition, this man made no effort to disguise his disdain. He mocked her in rehearsals, questioned her abilities, and belittled her presence as if she didn't belong at the same level as him. To Shania, who had fought tooth and nail to break into the male-dominated world of country and pop, the humiliation was unforgettable. He would make sly comments about her costumes, call her performances overproduced, and even tell others in private that she was more of a marketing experiment than a true artist. On stage, his arrogance simmered through forced smiles and passive-aggressive gestures, the kind that only insiders noticed, but that Shania felt with every nerve in her body. It was not just about rivalry, it was about being treated as lesser by someone who feared her rise, someone who wanted to diminish her glow because it threatened his own. Shania carried the bitterness of those moments for years, turning them into quiet fuel for her performances. Each time she stepped on stage, she made sure no one could ever doubt her star power again. She sang louder, moved bolder, and delivered with the confidence of someone who refused to be overshadowed. She hated him, not just for what he said, but for what he represented. The dismissive attitude of male performers who couldn't accept that a woman could outsell them, outshine them, and outlast them. The rivalry burned silently, rarely spoken of in interviews, but Shania later admitted that his words cut deeper than fans could ever imagine. This man underestimated the force she was becoming, and in doing so, he only fueled her drive to dominate the charts. By the time Come On Over became one of the best-selling albums in history, and her tours filled stadiums worldwide, the rivalry was no longer a battle. It was a victory dance. But Shania never forgot the sting of being looked down upon by someone who should have been a peer. When she revealed her list of men she hated at 60, his name resurfaced, a reminder that behind her dazzling success were moments of deep humiliation. To Shania, this rival on stage was not simply an annoyance. He was the embodiment of the toxic competitiveness that tried to keep her in her place. And by hating him, she reminded herself never to allow anyone to diminish her power again. The world saw her smile, but inside, she carried the fire of defiance, born from the ridicule of a rival who never believed she would stand the test of time. Long before the world knew her name, before the sold-out arenas and glittering awards, Shania Twain endured an encounter that would leave scars she carried for decades, an experience tied not to the bright lights of fame, but to the shadows of her youth. Among the 5 men she admitted to hating, one was not a rival performer or industry gatekeeper, but a figure from her past who tried to break her spirit before it had the chance to soar. Growing up in a difficult household marked by poverty and dysfunction, Shania faced more than the challenges of financial hardship. She lived through the constant tension of her mother and stepfather's volatile relationship, a storm of arguments and abuse that left her walking on eggshells day after day. As a child, she should have been shielded, protected, and nurtured, but instead, she bore witness to violent outbursts that shook her to the core. She would later confess that she learned to sleep lightly, always ready to intervene, to protect her mother and to protect herself. But there was one man in particular who took advantage of that vulnerability, someone who crossed boundaries, someone who used intimidation and manipulation to keep her silent. Shania later described how she felt trapped in her own home, forced to live with a constant knot of fear in her stomach, never knowing when the next storm would erupt. He used fear as a weapon, controlling her through threats, anger, and emotional cruelty. Though she rarely speaks his name, the hatred she carried for him was carved deeply into her memory. It was not the fleeting anger of a passing disagreement, but the enduring resentment of a child robbed of safety. When she finally found the courage to leave home and build a life of her own, she vowed never to be controlled by any man again. The encounter shaped her resilience, making her strong in ways she did not choose but was forced to develop. It taught her how to endure pain, how to hide her emotions, and how to keep moving even when fear was suffocating. Years later, as the world celebrated her as a global superstar, the echoes of that past still lingered. In interviews, she would carefully touch on it, speaking vaguely about her difficult childhood, about surviving abuse, about learning to protect herself through music. But when she turned 60 and finally revealed the 5 men she hated, this figure was included, a reminder that her story was not only about fame and betrayal in adulthood, but about surviving darkness in childhood. By admitting her hatred for him, she wasn't just venting old bitterness. She was reclaiming the voice that fear had once stolen. She showed the world that even legends are shaped by pain, that behind her dazzling career was a girl who endured what no child should. Her hatred for him was not destructive, but transformative, fueling her determination to never again be silenced or diminished by cruelty. Not every wound Shania Twain carried was born out of betrayal in love or cruelty in childhood. Some came from the cold, calculated grip of business. One of the 5 men she revealed she hated was not a family member, not a performer, not even a rival, but a businessman, a figure in the music industry who treated her not as a human being with dreams and emotions, but as a product to be packaged, sold, and controlled. In the early days of her rise, when Shania was fighting to establish her place as more than just another pretty face in Nashville, this man stepped into her life under the guise of guidance. He was powerful, connected, and positioned himself as the one who could make her a star. But his vision of Shania was not the authentic artist she knew herself to be. It was a manufactured image, a puppet built to appeal to the market. He dictated what songs she should sing, what outfits she should wear, even how she should stand in photos, dismissing her own creative instincts as if they were meaningless. Shania, who had spent her childhood writing songs in private notebooks, pouring her soul into lyrics that reflected her truth, was forced to listen as this man told her those songs would never sell. He wanted her to abandon her identity to fit into a formula he believed was more profitable. The more success she gained, the colder he became, reducing every achievement to numbers, every performance to ticket sales, every album to units moved. There was no warmth, no acknowledgement of her artistry, no recognition of her as a person. To him, Shania Twain was simply a business venture, and his decisions made it clear that her voice mattered less than his bottom line. She hated him not only for his arrogance, but for what he represented, the system that chewed up artists and spat them out when they were no longer profitable, the machine that saw women as replaceable commodities rather than visionaries. The tension between them grew over time, boiling beneath the surface as she fought to carve her own path. When she wanted to push boundaries, he insisted on playing it safe. When she dared to mix pop with country, he warned her it would fail. And when she succeeded beyond his imagination, selling out stadiums and breaking global records, he took credit, claiming it was his strategy that made her what she was. Shania carried that anger quietly for years, but at 60, she admitted that she despised the way he treated her, the way he dismissed her art, the way he tried to erase her voice in favor of profit margins. His name may not have been as public as her ex-husband's or her rivals, but his impact was undeniable. He was the man who forced her to fight harder for her creative control, the one who taught her that, to survive in the business, she had to stand firm, take risks, and trust herself above anyone else. In hating him, Shania found the strength to reject the chains of the industry and redefine what it meant to be a female artist in control of her own destiny. For years, fans wondered why Shania Twain, known for her strength and honesty in her music, never spoke openly about the men who wronged her, the figures who left scars on her journey. She smiled in interviews, offered diplomatic answers, and kept her past wrapped in silence, even as tabloids speculated and fans begged for the truth. But at 60, something shifted. Shania finally decided to reveal the 5 men she hated, not to shock or to stir scandal, but because time had given her the freedom to speak without fear. She had reached a point in her life where her legacy was secure, her reputation untouchable, her voice more powerful than the whispers of critics or the judgments of executives. For decades, she carried those names quietly, fearing that to speak them might derail her career, fuel controversy, or distract from her art. In the 1990s and early 2000s, the industry punished women who spoke out. A female artist criticizing powerful men was branded difficult, ungrateful, or unprofessional, while men were applauded for bluntness and control. Shania understood this reality better than anyone, so she played the game, stayed quiet, and poured her truth into songs instead of interviews. But the silence was never permanent. The years brought perspective. The scandals faded. The wounds scarred over. And Shania herself grew stronger through survival. She had endured betrayal, humiliation, control, and abuse, yet she had outlasted them all. By her 60th birthday, she had nothing left to lose by speaking her truth. Revealing her hatred was not an act of bitterness. It was an act of liberation. She wasn't naming these men to relive the pain. She was naming them to show that she had survived it, that she was no longer defined by what they had done to her. For Shania, turning 60 was not about aging out of relevance, but about stepping into full ownership of her life and her story. She wanted fans to see the real woman behind the legend, the human being who had struggled, fallen, and risen again. She wanted young women in the industry to know that silence isn't the only option, that it is possible to speak truth, even against powerful figures, and come out stronger. The timing was intentional too. This was not the revelation of a rising star desperate for headlines, but the wisdom of an icon who had seen it all. By revealing the 5 men she hated now, she took control of her narrative once more, ensuring that the truth came from her lips and not from rumor or speculation. For her, hatred had been a private flame, a force she used to fuel her rise. But at 60, she chose to expose it to the light, proving that even legends have ghosts, and even queens of country carry stories the world never imagined. When Shania Twain finally opened up at 60 and admitted the truth about the 5 men she hated, the world listened in stunned silence. For decades, she had been the voice of strength and resilience, the singer whose music inspired millions to embrace independence, courage, and self-worth. Yet she had carefully kept this side of her story hidden. Now, with nothing left to prove, and no one left to answer to, she laid it bare. Her confession was not about vengeance or lingering anger, but about honesty, about lifting the veil on what it truly means to survive in an industry and in a world that so often tried to break her. She spoke of her ex-husband, Mutt Lange, the man who betrayed her with her closest friend, a wound that cut so deeply it nearly silenced her voice forever. She named the industry gatekeeper who told her she would never make it, a man whose arrogance represented the walls she was forced to climb just to be heard. She revealed the rival performer who mocked her talent and tried to humiliate her, a symbol of the toxic competitiveness that sought to keep her in the shadows. She exposed the abusive figure from her past, the man who robbed her of childhood safety and left her with scars she carried into adulthood. And she acknowledged the cold businessman who reduced her to a product, a faceless cog in the machinery of profit, dismissing her artistry and trying to strip her of her creative identity. These 5 men, different in their roles but similar in their cruelty, were the ghosts that lingered behind her every triumph. For years, she buried their memory beneath smiles, awards, and record-breaking achievements, but they were always there, shadows reminding her of the battles she had to fight. At 60, she did not reveal their names to wallow in bitterness. She revealed them to prove she had conquered them, to show that hatred did not destroy her, but instead became the fire that forged her resilience. The fans who heard her confession understood immediately that this was not a tabloid scandal or a sensational revelation. It was the final chapter in a story of survival. Shania Twain was not just a superstar. She was a woman who had endured betrayal, humiliation, fear, and exploitation, and had come out stronger than ever. She made it clear that by admitting her hatred, she was not feeding it, but releasing it, turning pain into power and showing the world that true strength comes not from pretending life is perfect, but from confronting the darkness and owning it. Her final words carried a message far bigger than her own life. She told her fans that no matter what they endured, no matter who tried to silence them, betray them, or diminish them, they had the power to rise, to endure, and to shine brighter than ever. In hating those 5 men, she had found her freedom, and in sharing that hatred, she gave her fans permission to release their own burdens, to speak their truths, and to live without shame. At 60, Shania Twain did not just reveal a secret. She delivered a legacy of honesty, courage, and empowerment that will outlast every betrayal. Shania Twain did not let the men she hated define her. Instead, she turned that hatred into the power that made her unforgettable.